Before this event, I conducted a survey of publications that belong to the Canadian Christian Communicators Association. I sent the survey to 36 publications. To put that in context, I've been sort of following the health and the status of this sector for about 20 years. In 2003, the Canadian Church Press, which is the predecessor to the CCCA, had 81 member publications. In 2019, it had 47. Well, today there are 36. That probably tells you everything you need to know about where publications are at today. So these 17 publications responded to the survey. And when I asked them if their print circulation is increasing, decreasing, or stable, 13 said it's decreasing. 2 said it's stable, and a couple said it was increasing, although they said very slightly. All had a online presence of some kind, but tracking was not a strong suit for many. They could tell me about some monthly views and things like that, but they did not have the analytics. But they all knew it was important, and they all believed it was increasing, and they all thought it was the future. In terms of who they served, 14 of these 17 served denominations or a segment of a denomination, for example, Atlantic Baptist Women. 2 said their audience was more general. When it comes to the age of the readers, not all publications keep track. Of those that do, 13 or 17, 76% said the readers use 60 plus, and obviously in terms of revenue, 15 of the 17 depend on denominations for some or most of their support for the revenue. This is especially true for diocesan publications, obviously. Only 3 indicated that advertising was part of their revenue mix. And almost all are involved in fundraising in some way. It reminds me, and she's not here today, but it reminds me of one publisher who once said, most days I feel like I'm a fundraiser, but I publish a magazine on the side. And maybe some of you can also relate to that. Since denominational support is so key for so many, the health of those denominations becomes very important. 9 of those 17 said the church groups they serve are mostly older people, and those congregations are obviously getting older. Not all answered this question, but they know that that's happening. 9 also said that denominations are in decline. 5 said they were stable, and that's a good thing. Only 1 reported that they thought the denomination was increasing, and they said that was due to immigration, which poses another challenge altogether if your immigrants are mostly coming from the Philippines, Ethiopia, or somewhere else like that. How do you engage and reach them? Since 88% of respondent publications get revenue from denominations that help propose denominations, it becomes a very critical factor. When I ask them about challenges to the future, no news to those of you here, continuing decline and possible disappearance of print publications. We all know how significant print is. The people who get print are our major sources of revenue and support, respond to fundraising. Almost everybody said one of the big challenges was monetizing digital readership. An aging readership. This is significant right through Canadian society. When you're talking about dementia, when you're talking about affordable housing, when you're talking about personal care. We boomers, we changed everything in Canadian society as we got more and moved through it. And now we're changing everything relating to aging. And we are, and our parents were, the most significant, most generous givers that is not true for subsequent generations. Research by those folks like Imagine Canada and others who do research in this area show that every generation gives less than the one before. And now, does anyone here get David Coletto's weekly newsletter? He's a poster here in Canada. His last one was about precarity. When asked what is the mood of the country, he said, people feel precarious. And when people feel precarious, they stop eating out as much. They stop golfing as much. They stop going to movies as much. They take shorter or no vacations and they give less. And that was something that we all need to be mindful of as we face the future. So falling revenues is something that everyone mentioned as a challenge ahead. And then, of course, that growing move towards digital. How to do it well, but also which platforms? How do you engage in this noisy environment? I recently, I said this at a meeting we had on Wednesday with folks in the Canadian Association. I recently, because I'm slow to learn about these things, I recently heard about the clip economy. Has anybody heard about what the clip economy is? You will need to know this. So if you go on Instagram, you'll see 30 or 60-second clips of podcasts and videos. And you think, wow, these people must be doing a lot of work to make sure that I get a little 30 or 60-second clip. No, someone in Bangladesh is making that for them. And they get paid $1 for every 1,000 views. And that's an economy that has emerged. People making 30 and 60-second clips of longer videos. And when people talk about this, there was an article about this in the Atlantic Monthly recently. If you Google it and find it, the general feeling is people aren't going to watch a long video, but they'll watch a clip. And maybe they'll go to your website. So these are things that are out there that everyone's going to have to be thinking about and wondering about. But let's talk about solutions a little bit, because we all know what the challenges are. I did ask them, what kinds of solutions can we see going forward? And one of the things that emerged from almost everyone who responded was greater collaboration, stronger together. We have to find ways to collaborate in publications and denominations that support them. There needs to be more cost sharing across publication and sharing of content, including sharing reporters. When I was in the Mennonite Publishing Guild a long time ago, we had a little collective called Meeting House. So we would meet together once or twice a year, and if there was an event happening where I happened to live, the collective would say, would you cover that for every while? And we'll share that among the members, and we'll make the cost together of whatever it costs to do that, which was, of course, minimal because the event was happening where I live. I didn't have to travel there to be my hotel. So that's another way to begin to look at this, which is, hey, that big national conference is in Vancouver. Who lives in Vancouver? You could cover it for everyone if you had interest in it. So more cost sharing, also more investment in new media. How can we collaborate together? One of the things we talked about on Wednesday, when we had a meeting of the editors and publishers, it was about a new platform where everybody could have a whole. There is a URL out there that still belongs to the Evangelical Fellowship of Canada called Christianity.ca. The Americans in the Rate.ca is the Canadian suffix for internet. It used to be active in Sterling, now it has been surrendered. Well, should a new home be created called Christianity.ca, where all of the pictures can have a home and be found by anyone who wants to know Christianity. And lastly, something that people talked about was training. How can we enter and train out a new cohort of younger journalists who understand how to write about news, not opinion. Everybody has an opinion, and lots of people know how to write their opinions. But to write news and to cover stories and interview people and let those stories be told. I know that Catholics are doing this. I went started at a week-long course that they offer here in Toronto every year. And I know that other groups are talking about it or doing it informally or thinking about it. But what if collectively there was a way to say we could collaborate together to online or in person to help journalists, new journalists, learn about math? And finally, and this is something Rebecca and I talked about, what about cross-border? Are there things we can do also together across the border? I come from the Anabaptist tradition, and in the Anabaptist tradition, one of the tenets of Anabaptism is a government may not tell me who my enemies are. Right now, we have some tension with a country to connect with us, but we are a church, a collective, a worldwide, global gathering of believers. And Donald Trump cannot tell us who our enemies are. And so, how can we collaborate across that border? What things can we share with each other to help us know what each other believes, is doing, and is doing to try to address the challenges we face? One of the first ones that came to mind when we talked was aid. Canada has cut back its aid. The United States has almost eliminated all its aid. Well, we also, on both sides of the border. So what does that mean for the work we do together in Canada, in the United States, but together totally across the border? There are lots of issues we could look at together, try to all understand. But I'll turn it over to Rebecca now to share her colleagues from the Americas.
So thank you, John. And I also want to get to what you all are thinking and feeling. But we did, ACP did a survey, of which I'll bring up on screen. But essentially, we're not as far apart as one might think. If we think about racial cross divides that John said about the sort of the pressures on Christian media, very similar in the States. There is an anxiety about revenue, about staffing, about capacity. Although, in the way that our members or our survey participants feel like they're coming together, they're finding new ways, they're looking at stronger philanthropic support, fundraising. To a lesser extent, they're looking to events, they're looking to audience development. They're looking for different ways to grow their revenue while containing their costs. So all that's very, very, very similar. And we also looked at, and of course, we also contended the aging readership. Print costs, distribution costs are enormous when we go through the postal system. And so one of the things that, and we're also hearing from our membership that collaboration is a key piece. And so and this is one of the things that I wanted to bring to the group, what collaboration might look like. And then share my screen, which you can all see it there. So we can look a little bit at some of our survey results. We can scroll down for a sec. And so some of the, while we're in challenges, some of the things that our survey participants had to do to stay viable, some first hiring, most of them cut freelance spending. So again, content, content is king, has to have content. It's the only thing that makes you unique. Many people have had to cut some of that to stay viable. Some, to a lesser extent, have reduced staff hours. Some have laid off staff. Some have reduced their print frequency. And so that speaks to that push to online. And all those channels are really important. But the people who love print really love print. And people interact with their printed product differently than they do with digital products. It's a stickier read. And some people have drama reserves, but most people, to stay viable, can just increase their fundraising efforts. So you're going to see that, like yesterday in our best practices or our best move session, we heard Susan Fish talk about all the different pieces that they've done to kind of supplement how they're getting the message out. So fundraising is a really big piece there. But let's hop on down to to how people like to collaborate. And so what we heard in our question of how open would your organization be to collaboration? Very open. over 35%, about 35% of respondents said very open. Next Hawks was unsure. And I think that really speaks to the willingness of, philosophically, yes, we all want to collaborate. We want to work together. Just our time together this week has shown there's a lot out there. We've all learned from one another. But the mechanics of how's that work, what will we actually do, can sometimes trip us up. So, and then there's a couple, some are very reluctant, and mainly the barriers tend to be some concerns about how either staff bandwidth of making it happen, or if we're too philosophically different sometimes to collaborate. So when we talked about what forms of collaboration are most appealing, let's see if I can get us all in there. Shared advertising sales was really compelling. Content sharing was compelling. There's one more. And training and professional development, super compelling. And so what John, in his survey, those were, maybe you didn't talk about advertising necessarily, but combined revenue focus was something that was important. The content sharing and training, really critical. And then to a lesser extent, fundraising or grant allocations is some of that combined piece. And then also on the cost saving side, some of that shared distribution and printing. So when I was talking offline to the transcontinental people who were here yesterday, and I live in the States, so a lot of publications that I did with are really in Canada. And so I was asking them, hey, is there a way to make that printing work for someone that's in the States? And they were like, if you band together, if geographically somebody's similar, so they're shipping bulk to a place, those are some options sometimes. And I think thinking creatively and also getting to know one another and what our needs are, and being clear about what our needs are without expectation that someone's going to necessarily fill them, oftentimes you feel you can't see the gap. Does that make sense? Okay, let's see if there's anything else that we want to share in here. Joint events, shared back office services, shared technology are also intriguing things, but they're kind of far down on the totem pole. And when we get into those back office services, that's I think where a lot of the maybe denominational differences, or the fact that many people have parent organizations that are already really well established. You're not going to, do a shared payroll service or a shared, bookkeeping. But I think also we were talking in our best practices session just before this one about, are there opportunities to create networks across our publications? Like, is there an opportunity for like a podcast network, or we're gathering together for some production services, for advertising support, for even guest continuity? There are models out there that do some of those types of things successfully. So thinking about what could that look like, and how would we work it? Let's see if there's anything else. Oh, and bulk purchasing was, and my experience with bulk purchasing is really on the online printing materials market, like in the Wayback Machine. I used to belong to a cooperative where, you could buy your newsprint, and you could buy different things in bulk ways. So I think other people are intrigued by those types of collaboration. And then I think this gets to the barriers to collaboration. The different organizational cultures is the thing that's really key. But then second to that, and not really that far behind organizational culture, is staff bandwidth. And so I think, you have to be really protective of your time. You can't go on a fool's errand to be like, let's try this and not have it work out. And this is where I always have my dad in the back. I have like measure twice, cut once. That's right. And so that's where I think being clear and understanding of where people are coming from and sketching out those collaboration ideas can help us not go down rabbit holes. And then also, I always think of it as doing like the next most achievable step. So it doesn't have to be this fully formed, amazing idea. It just has to be, what's one incremental thing that we can do to move that ball forward. And then you do the next thing. And then suddenly have this amazing thing. And the other piece, and this speaks to, I think, sometimes a scarcity mindset that we all have, this idea of an inequitable resources among partners. So no one likes to feel like they're giving more than anyone else or taking more. So how do we create situations of collaboration where we're all coming from a position of strength, that everyone's bringing their best selves or their best uh, abilities to the group and benefiting. And sometimes, we get hung up on like, well, there's not one to go around. And so that's a difficult shift when you have staff concerns and you have monetary concerns. How can we kind of free ourselves to go to that abundance mindset? I think that's everything we wanted. Oh, and then some people are starved by their bad experiences. And that happens. I mean, we've all had relationships that have gone wrong. And so I will share more about this in the subsequent ways, but I felt like it was really important to kind of look at collaboration is something that everyone craves. But I'd love in our time together to get a little bit more specific about what you all see as opportunities for collaboration. That doesn't mean you're committed to anything. But let's talk about where your needs are and where you think you might have some opportunities where you would want to sort of give into the group. Does that make sense, John? Is that where you're at? And because we have so many likes, I'd love to open it up to you all. Maybe let's start with what your needs are. Anyone to share? Tell me about content sharing, because that was the most. So, what kinds of content do people want? Or have you looked like you're going to say something? Or was that just so I didn't do it? And it was, yes, have it. And you just throw our talents around when you're finished with it. Actually, I want to necessarily want to talk about what I want, but I wanted to share with you all that our confidence in big leadership, we see it as sort of, like turnover, but open to for reuse in our agreement with our funder. So if you go to Fake Leadership, well, we're bring the geeks, let's do our best. However, in the interest of abundance, our content is purposeful as long as you don't change it. And you link to our website. So just offering that out to bring does anyone else have content that due to their financial structure they want to share that it's important to push out into the world?
So I do mean like we can repost it or you just was only it back to you because I think all of us would like to have bring us back to ourselves.
Yeah.
You can repost the comment.
As long as you attribute it.
The text, the photos are a little bit of a different matter.
Yeah.
But yes, as long as there is at some point attribution and a link to our website, the text and actually the letters. It's not ideal for us, honestly, but it's part of our, commitment to the work.
I mean, we can't do that in parent because of relevance products. But we can, but obviously share our links and then drive traffic back to us. You posted makes it direct.
So it sounds like what's important to Justin that maybe because there's not a lot of people following up to say, oh my gosh, this is how I can contribute or whatnot. That people need to have clicks to drive back to their website. Is that okay? All right. So maybe there's opportunities. I know John was talking about doing a combined newsletter of activated content that then links back to people's websites. Yeah, go ahead. Well, we should all introduce ourselves as we go along.
So my dad is big in my career, career, how I actually say this better now. Yeah, no, no, okay. I contact partnerships for us is more specific to a story. We have a limited budget, trying to work with writers to get the resources they need. But if we could share writers on a specific topic, or regional writers who don't have access to some we do, then yeah, East by Kate's content partnership has been really valuable. I'll just add that that's one way we can do stories and pay our writers better. And we partner with another organization. Like we partnered with Broadwood before because we have one writer that is familiar to our readers and also is connected to that. Amazing. And they were able to write a slightly different conclusion for us, a slightly different conclusion for Broadwood. And we were really proud of what we were able to then pay that writer. We've done collaborations with Canadian Mennonite because we're like, we can know our readers while we're investigative journalism. But for the rates we pay, it's really hard to get that. So if we go together with them on a story that our readers are both equally as interested in, case by case basis, we can agree on the writer, the pay, what parameters on that story, timeline for us to all head out at the same time. And then we each read back to each other, put a note at the bottom like, yeah, this article is made possible in partnership with our friends at Canadian Mennonite or whatever. It's just a really beautiful way to build those connections.
Can you tell a little bit more about how those, it feels very organic and very direct event. You personally don't have a relationship with the Canadian Mennonite. You're not just going to knock on somebody's random door. But can you talk about sort of how those partnerships develop and if there's an opportunity to scale that in a different way and how that might look? I have multiple mics.
Yeah, I think you actually can go up to somebody you don't know and propose something like that. And we've done that, and we've also been approached like recently Extra Magazine, which is a LGBTQ publication in I believe Toronto or they national anyway. They are trying to figure out how to cover stories about queer people who are people with faith, and they feel very uncomfortable about anything things about church. They don't know that well, and they're all intimidated. So they want to work with us and produce a piece about what's like in her these days. Just to call her trans people to not cover that. So yeah, so I think actually can, but and then often like if you might split the cost of the writing or one publication, maybe like and then one publication might pay the bulk of the cost, and then the other publication will take on the bulk of the candidate. So you kind of make it even out that way, and they're having us well partners in access. So that's just one way to look.
I'm on it. Oh, and then so sorry, I want to do them just because I was out first. Sally, it's being the leadership. One to add that we do have our frequent policy on our website, so your leadership still take a look at that. And it also one other thing that I forgot to mention is that my colleagues actually teach sheets to her starting a new newsletter called Conversations Project, which is very focused on stories about conversations, but it's a curated newsletter. So I can share with you their information if you wanted to send links to their stories, their applications, and they will and they might share it out in this monthly. So that's another option. Okay.
Really specifically, I would love it if we could collaborate on stories about AI so that we can actually go beyond the Wikipedia answers to look at the people who are really thinking about it and on the sides of like not just the early adopters, but the reasons to resist. So I would love if we shared work on that, even if it's very similar things being published in different places.
Well, and I think that's I've been a part of projects. Actually, we did one in Maryland, the U.S. about the heroin epidemic, and so what we did was all the publications who were TV stations that wanted to participate. They had some grounding, like actual research and documentation, and then everybody mobilized it. So it could be that can certainly be a model that could come out of a, and then you basically choose the time frame so that you're doing almost like a content block is what they might think of in TV. So you're making a larger impact. You have the story, but you're localizing it. So in some is that kind of what you're thinking, Cynthia? Okay. Is anyone else collaborating on articles? I mean, we're seeing also Broadview and the Midway Free Press. I think that's really interesting. I know Fab's news server things have FABS out in Seattle in the States has a religion newswire for that region. And that's a very interesting project where they're hiring freelance journalists, but then they're also placing in secular newspapers. They're placing in other spots. And so I'm curious, does anyone have a collaborative agreement or relationship like Broadway's doing with Winnipeg in your neck of the woods? Okay.
Curious to hear more, but we don't.
Yeah. So, I think no, actually, I had different about I did a nice interview with the long campaigns. She's a member of ACP, and it is your passion project, and it needs to be a little bit more sustainable for the long haul. But it's, I think having a platform for story sharing and content sharing is really critical. That's something ACP started doing this summer. We work with, our Canadians to see how we can try to make out a little bit more text order. But those should be coming along. We talked a lot about articles to stories, but to Sally's point, like you can't repost images from vacant leadership. So how are you guys intending with those types of things, with graphics and photographs? Is there any sharing going on with that? Do you want sharing? Are you happy with some photos or?
One thing I've done,
Sorry, I feel like I'm talking to my
in our, we have, so in order to share our content, as Jocelyn pointed out, we have a very expensive rights in our contracts with our signatures. And just as a practical matter, photographers who back on that, and our writers don't really care. And so that's where we kind of, I shouldn't say you can use the photos, but it's more complicated because they're so easy to spray, they're easy to steal, they're easy to use out of context. They're easy to grab and use for advertising. So it's not so much a fan, but I do find the photographers are much more careful about it. Also, I was going to say one thing about the needs, which is we wrote about the leadership. It's a really interesting story. A church, it's actually in Spokane, but a church in Spokane was Rosie. And this woman, Tracy, had been organizing sort of community gatherings around me. And this church really close gave her organization their building. And the idea was she's a journalist, and she had this local religion use kind of thing that it's all digital going. And when the building didn't really work out, she want to keep the building. They sold the building and they used the money to see this religion newsletter, their region. And now they're expanding into this sort of syndication project. So it was actually, we were doing an option as well of what closing churches are doing to buildings. And that's like one of those unique I've ever heard of.
Yeah, it strikes me that maybe our starter step, we all need that first right step. Maybe the starter step is just to list out what content is available and sort of what the rules are around it. So, we've heard from Sally and Faith in Leadership. We know that FAB's news services there. When ACP puts their Fluffy Wire story sharing and content up, we can keep a list of that. And that feels like a low impact way where people can say, yes, I have something I want to give. And, you know, obviously check the licensing and whatnot. We'll make sure that's up. But that does that feel like the next right step on collaboration? And Susan, I haven't forgotten your AI great. I love that. Collaborative article ideas. So I'd like to turn now, and then John, unless you have other things you want to say about story sharing and collaboration, I was going to move to training and development.
So, yeah, that's come up a lot. The idea that we need to raise up the next generation writers. What I've discovered, and maybe you had too, is that there are lots of people who want to write, but they don't know how to write news. They know how to tell you what they think, but they don't know how to do an interview. They don't know how to get out of the story, like they don't know how to double source. They don't know any of these things. So what kinds of things can we create together? And this could easily be cross corporate because it's news. But the Catholics who I'm engaged with now on this, in addition to their in-person 1 week long workshop of God in the City, which happens here in Toronto every August, where they teach aspiring Catholics how to become news writers. They do something on Zoom. They do a sort of a God in the City night over 4, 5, 6 sessions where people can do Zoom. But we could easily do that, where we could invite aspiring writers to join seminars, to listen to people who are in the field talk about it, and then giving assignments and having to go back and having the editing. And, and as we all know here, one of the first things you need to learn as an aspiring writer is it's not personal. Everyone gets editing, right? That's how you learn. And that's how you grow. But yes, to find ways to create some sort of institute or seminar or workshop or something where we can help people, and there are many of them. And obviously, that just that someone mentioned on Wednesday too at our meeting that I often think about the next generation of styrene heirs. Certainly, that is important. They're seniors, people who retired at the age of 55, thinking, "What do I want to do? I hope to be a writer." They've got time, they've got experience, they've got contacts. They too could also maybe grow onto this and say, yes, I'd like to learn to be a news writer for and grow about location.
So then there's two kind of groups of people that I think that are contributing content. So those are, professional or proto-professional journalists. And then I think a lot of people get content submitted from either their congregation or just kind of over the chance that people are submitting things. And so there's a lot of models, and I'm interested to hear from you all about where your articles are coming from, if it's that contributor model or if it's journalists or proto-journalists or surviving journalists, and how and what kind of support you need to get the kind of content that you want out of those people. Because a lot of times providing the journalistic principles to contributors doesn't always land for that. They want to tell you what's going on, and they're chock full of opinion, and they've never really understood that sourcing is not just internal. Although we all have rich interior lives. So I'm interested to hear from you all, like where are your needs? Like if you could wave a magic wand, how would you support the people that are providing content in a way that helps you?
One area that we struggle with is people who really can't absorb on the institutional church very well and thoroughly. We have also, right, there's they have kind of a congregation, but still they know what's going on, but processes, and we did one time have a staff writer who was dedicated to covering that, and we retired ever since. We've had people trying at it, and so unfortunately just attention with me or something this year. We realized that the staff was kind of simple, was to give a bigger chance to the ones who do have that kind of church background, church interest, as opposed to, there's lots of great students, and some of them are they might be coming to us on because they're interested in social justice of marriage rather than they did just part of that. So trying to foster that, but it's hard because that institution is like so many facets. It's kind of easy to understand it, but to have somebody who really know us, like these are the people here. So I have the fact that these are the documents that matter in this instance. All that situation sounds real bad.
It strikes me that it's like getting to know me. So those institutions, and sometimes, yeah, because they need to freelancers need to be able to write about a wide variety of things. So they might have a lot of breadth, but not a lot of depth. And so maybe there's some idea of, gosh, how do you get to know your beat? How do what are these documents? What are these spaces? How do you treat the church as an institution? And I think also in the media in general, and John, you probably see this, um, mainstream or secular media is kind of loath to touch religious topics because they don't understand it, they don't know it. But religion and church institutions are just as critical as governmental institutions. They are businesses. They have a huge impact on people's lives, and it's like a hole there because people are nervous about it. Like, do you see that, John? And how would you, with your experience, how would you kind of jump over that divide and cover churches as institutions?
I used to work in the international legal development sector, and it is a powerful and huge institution as well. But a lot of people think of it as good people doing good things, and not incredible organizations that they are. So similarly for church and religious institutions. Is anybody here familiar with the HALO project? Do you know that, right? In Canada, at least, the HALO project is estimated that places of worship in this country are worth an economic value of $18 billion a year. And they use stable formula at $3.43 of economic value for every dollar in a congregation's budget. The space they rent for marginal or give away for free to AA or to a youth club or a basketball hoop on the parking lot or someplace where theater can be practiced and it doesn't cost them very much or anything. So right away, if you go to a government official or anyone, say it's about $18 billion. And by the way, if you go on the HALO Project website, you can zone in on a specific church and go into your community. First of all, to say how much is it worth in Toronto and Winnipeg and Montreal and Vancouver. And then you can look at a specific congregation and see what their development ways to it can be. And so you begin to translate stuff, not into what you feel, at least, we feel good because we went to church, but rather look at the value of this organization in a community, in a neighborhood. And suddenly that speaks differently to all sorts of folks.
Okay, so maybe just like mechanics of institutional week reporting and then elements of actual like journalism. I'm curious on that contributor front. What are challenges that you all are seeing when you have? Is it that people are sending in stuff that needs to be edited deeply, or it's just all mark and we feel awkward about saying no? What are the problems there when you get stuff either that you've solicited or not from just people in general? Do you all just love what you get? Anyone? Yeah.
So,
Yep.
for us, it's on a journey. Perhaps the biggest challenge is that people want to fellowship themselves.
Mm.
That they've got their own networks and their own social media channels and their own blogs. And so how we sort of bring that in and partner with them internally. See, partnerships externally are great. We just, sometimes struggle to say, hey, remember us? We're the voice of the denomination. We want to help elevate. And it's a, trying to win people over, I think, or remind them, that we're better together, and that, we're not working against our purposes. That, that, and that we can all elevate their voice, right? Because we have the readership and we have the channels, we have the followers, to say, hey, you don't have to build it on your own. But we'll never let you, we'll let you have your channels, to both end.
You know, I was just talking to people at the Lenfest Institute, which is a nonprofit news organization that owns the Philadelphia Inquirer in the States. And they are very much about the ecosystem of news media. So they're funding a lot of innovation projects, and one of which is how to harness influencers, content creators that are direct publishing, and again, come from a position of strength. A lot of depending on what influencer or what online person you're working on, they already have the followers, they already have the content and the readership. And so, and I think people in general are not educated enough in the greater public about what journalism is. And so they don't even think, like they don't recognize that that influencer maybe is not working in a journalistic way, as a publication might. And so I would look to some of the research that they've done. They've done some pilot programs on how newsrooms have partnered with influencers to have a win on both sides. But it is, those are incremental pieces and individual pieces. Susan.
I agree with what Jocelyn said, that we find people who are happy to talk about social justice type of issues. Sometimes we have a hard time, I have a hard time getting people who are more well known AGMs and so on. But also the more transcendent stories of faith are sometimes hard to write. But one of the things we've been finding, we have a column that is a faith stories column that we ask the people to write it. So it's a person story. And we've had a lot of trouble with that. And there was part of me that was assuming it was because people weren't having those experiences, but we've shifted to a little bit as offering the opportunity for them to do it orally and then we write it. And we've so some of it is that people who were the contributors who are not writers, that know how to tell a story, that don't always know how, or would take them forever to do it. So the commitment hasn't been there. So that again, we're sort of finding where the barriers are and the relationships in knowing that. And that seems to have been a good program.
That's so interesting. I just wanted to close a thought there. Do you then, those oral stories, are you putting those on your podcast and repurposing, or are you totally separate?
No, because we're not really podcasters. No, it's turning those, like it's actually transcribing, but they say shaking a little, then sending it back to them to say, did we take out, so we're sort of trying to using their words.
Yeah, thank you.
So it's interesting to hear that some of you are getting unsolicited contributions. That's not very common. One thing that has occurred to me, and that I try to remind myself of, and when I look around the room, I realize we're all overworked and under-resourced, and we don't think we're all that special or unique or have any power. You guys are among the most powerful in your denomination. You are the gatekeepers. You don't feel that way. You feel put upon by your denominational overlords all the time. But the average person you sees you as someone they could never go to and say, would you consider this? They just don't. They're intimidated by us and who we are. I know what you're laughing at me, but really, it's true. People don't, because they don't think they have anything to say. And when you talk to them, you realize, oh, yeah, tell you, sorry, you migrated from Blair, and you went through this, and you did that, and you got here, and look at you now. And they think, nobody cares about the story. So they don't do anything. And somehow we have to work at that as well. During COVID, I read that, and I've heard, it's like I had to do my own research, a number of congregational leaders, Jewish, Muslim, and Christian, and Buddhist, were speaking into the COVID space. What does it mean to be a person of my faith in this COVID space? And I reached out to them and I said, would you share some of that? I mean, I had to edit some of the things, obviously. But we created a special section on the Winnipeg Free Press website where people, clergy, leaders, could then share thoughts about COVID and what it meant to be a person of faith at that particular moment. And we became a conduit, and I didn't go get it. They were going to say that. And that was a really good engagement with them. It gave me lots of material for my poems as well. But I think we also need to think about how we are perceived and how we break down the barriers, and the word barrier was used between us and potential contributors to help them see that we can be your witness. You have a story to tell them about it.
And so, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, can I have a
Absolutely.
one thing that we have tried to do to connect with our churches and get story ideas, and I don't know if anybody else does this, but we actually have a form on our website called Suggest a Story. And the link to that is in every single newsletter we send out, and then we occasionally do promote it on social as well. But so it's a form and it says like, these are the kind of stories we're looking for. And I think the nice thing about that is it takes the pressure off people, like they're not having to write it themselves. They can just be like, well, there's this really cool initiative at my church, or there's this really neat person that I think you might like to profile. And I mean, we don't get stories every day, but we've had some genuinely really great articles come out of that, Suggest a Story more. The other thing that we do, and again, as a denominational magazine, we've got a slightly different mandate than some others, but we follow something like over 300 social media accounts from our various churches and stuff in our denomination. So, and I go on there, basically all day late as I share socials. And I actively look for ideas, and then we have our editorial planning meetings every other month. And so it's like, oh, I saw this one Medicine Hat's Facebook page. Let's see if that's something there. Or, we've got a profile in this one where, one of our divisional channels, so that you can let folks share the Instagram page of a young church member who's a carver. And I was like, this guy looks interesting. Let's just reach out to him, see what his story is. So he's now going to be in our, I think our review content. Yeah, our review my content. So, just as a thought for the group, if folks aren't doing stuff like that, but you just have them being proactive like that. Yes, it takes time, but it really does pay off. And we try to be connected to Frontline that way. And another thing, sorry,
No, I love it. I'm writing down all your best practices.
This thing, and yeah, denominational, so that has this structure. But one thing my colleague Giselle and I did in the past year is that we set up. So we have 4 divisions in our territory, and so we set up meetings with the local PR teams. So they're more extra, but we set out meetings with PR teams in each of our divisions, and just to be like, hey, we're your internal entrepreneurs. These are some stories we are working on from your division, but it takes on anything that you think would have good crossover for us. So we also pick up divisional stories. Just partnered with our Berta folks on a 10-year retrospective on the Forming Moravian Fire. And so I did Wayne extensive podcasts where I interview people, and it's very story to talk about their experience, how to be evacuated, people coming back in to do the emergency disaster service response, how they actually experienced it as a church. So it's not just like we came in and helped people, and also like as a church fan, like we were grieving because, people in our congregation lost everything. So anyways, but the cool thing about that, just as an example, is that I did it as a podcast, and I got to remember all those stories. And then they took my interviews and wrote an article and then linked back to the podcast. So the podcast was like that people wanted to listen to the stories. So yeah, I don't know if that resonates with anyone, but those are the ways that we have tried to, again, not necessarily get into to contribute it themselves because yeah, people are writers, but people are
Yeah.
Great, lots of bosses in our congregation and our networks. So yeah, I know. I hope that's helpful. Maybe some ideas there.
I do love that, and that you institutionalize some of those reach outs. I think is really important. So it's not like this. Oh, we're doing this one big project. It's just part of your everyday. Sally, thought you were going to say something?
Speaking to what we were talking about earlier, I had two things that I learned that came to get leadership from and that I used to be journalism, so secular journalism. And so it was every time I got to do this, and I had to tell pastors that everything right has to be true. And when we weren't lying, but what I realized was pastors will just use this urban illustration. They'll just tell a story that's toward the end or sort of vague or, they don't move. And so I kept out of pushing back and saying, so this person who said this absolutely perfect thing that matches your scripture, and then did you talk to them? That was one experience I had to learn from. And then the other was working most of our featured art on the original secular journals. And almost by the fall, because we're talking about almost by the fall, they leave out everything that has to do with religion, really, even though they know we're a Christian congregation. And it's almost like a big leg start of the ball. And so one of the things it's helpful with some concept, like we had a writer who was also a pastor, so he was perfect. Now I had, well, we had him sign sheet where we lay out what we put the stories in and our template. I had the front in. Please include the denomination of the ministers of YouTube. Please include their comments. Please include ask them what is the Christian, what's the theology underpinning? Because they just need to leave it all out.
So and I'm seeing those further up, and I'm noticing lunch is going to be put out. So if we could think of what the next right step would be around this training and development piece, some of the things that I've heard were that some like basic journalism 101, show your sources, have some basics, say true things, looking at maybe a set of best practices for how to solicit effective contributions and how to utilize them. Maybe yet to know you beat session for how to cover religion as an institution. So those are just the things that I heard bubble up. But what do you all think is the next right step? Next right step. It could be. Is there one of those three ideas that you're like, yes, that's the one I need? Yeah. You have a mic in as well.
I was gonna say I was thinking that all of them sound very correct, and then Frank, especially many people who have all of this practices with journalism. I like to bring religion as the east. I'm realizing that I'm a journalist as well, so I know how to do that. But I think that the skills transfer very great church resilience with me. Right, I'm a journalism professor, and I have to advise university speakers. I'm realizing there's a gap in sort of my knowledge, and so I can really share that with my students or encourage them to come a little bit higher if my something that. So I think for me, there's like that's something I would want to delve into so that I can pass out to my students.
Okay, great. Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, I'm thinking about John's idea, but I wonder whether there's a similar version of doing it rather than a week at some point to something. I'm thinking, is it possible to do sort of segments that are recorded that would be here, like really whatever is below 101, or something that just a lovely kind of thing that, like I said, yeah, just a series of videos, like a new stuff or something would be sort of just a way of saying, start with this or go back to this if you're asking questions, or if something is coming in that isn't great, this video might help you understand why it's not great. So that always something I love.
Yeah.
I'm doing part of.
Perfect. Well, and I like that as sort of like here's your self-paced course, and here's the topics. Like, here's how you file a public information request, which is a critical reporting tool and would be great on that use this. So love that. And Ken, did you go ahead?
It's me, Pedro, so I'm sharing. One of the big responsibilities I have is the co-editor. And what I have started to do, or I guess the last year and a half, as our team has expanded, to take in not only editorial, but also we have an internal communications team now that looks after the business side. We have an external group that does video, that type of thing. So what I've started to do is offer copy editing servers. And it's very basic for those of us who've been in the business for a while, but it's proving to be extremely novel. And they're coming from all areas of the organization to check in with us. Like even a video producer has come because he says it helps him when he's trying to close caption video, that type of thing. Very basic to us because this is what we do on a daily basis, but it's proven to be extremely powerful to people across the organization, not just the individuals, but
That makes a lot of sense. It's not just reporting or it's the whole schmear. John, did you want to close us out?
Yeah, I need to go meet our keynote speaker though. But one thing that we discovered out in the city that we hadn't thought about at the start of it was at the end of it, the students wanted a certificate to say, I completed this. I am now a something. I did this. And then that didn't occur to us at the beginning. It's like, oh, yeah, I guess so. So if you made a something together and called it a something, and then as somebody went through the 3, 4, 5, whatever these number of webinars or sessions, at the end of it, you will achieve something. That said, you completed this course, and that is something that they can put on their LinkedIn, on their CVs if they need it, or if they reach out to you, say, I'll complete this course. So you can say, oh, okay. I know that you've got something like you use that.
I love that idea. So thank you all. I feel like we've gotten some achievable next steps, which I always love.